evening. Welcome to 2023's edition of AMP's annual Best Audio Brand and our LinkedIn Live today. I'm your host, Jane, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you all here today. Our guests today, who I will introduce in a second, are industry experts. So you're in great company. They have deep insights into the world of sonic branding. So I am delighted to welcome Bjorn Thorleifson, who is Head of Research and Insights at AMP, and Hannah Cahill, and she is Research and Insights Consultant at AMP as well. Thank you both for joining me today. Hi, Hannah. Hi, Bjorn.
Hi.
Thank you for having us. 45 minutes to an hour. The three of us are going to be exploring the impact of music on marketing. So we're going to talk about how brands are leveraging sonic strategies or possibly not. We're going to discuss 6 key pillars that are key to building a strong sonic identity. And we're also going to talk about why that's really important for brands and their owners today. But before we begin, let's start with a brief overview of this year's Best Audio Brands report, which is now, I understand, in its 5th year. Bjorn, do you want to give us a little bit of background and history on the report and the methodology used to evaluate the brands?
Of course, it will be my pleasure. So, as you said, this is the 5th year that we do the Best Audio Brands. And when we decided to do this big project, we saw that there was a need for something that was not just looking at individual sonic assets, but rather looking at the sonic strategy. So we wanted to focus on the effectiveness of the overall strategy rather than just sonic logo. So what we do is we look at all brand touchpoints and where brands are communicating and how they're using sound and music over the last 12 months. So are they using it effectively, and is it part of our overall strategy, or is it more just tactical, campaign-based, and so on?
Okay. Yeah, and in terms of the methodology, we actually use a variety of methods. So we have sonic analysis, AI, and we also use expert panels and some really comprehensive market examination. And then we're able to look at the sonic performance over the whole year on these 6 key pillars. And this year's report, we've actually got a lot of really in-depth data and more sectors than we actually ever have before. And you will also find lots of intriguing articles that should get CMOs really thinking about whether their sonic strategy is robust enough.
I mean, there's a lot of content in there. I have it here in front of me and have been enjoying reading through it. But it sounds from what you've just said, Hannah, that there's a really multifaceted approach to measurement here. And we've talked about these key pillars. Bjorn, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the pillars and what they mean for brand performance?
Yes. So when we're doing this analysis, we are taking into account both their social media, their TV campaigns, and all this data that we're gathering, whether that is even, likes on videos, comments, we sort them into the 6 key pillars. So it's customer trust, customer belonging, customer engagement, customer recognition, and of course, return on investment. And these pillars help us assess how effectively brands use sound to build emotional relationship with consumers. Create a sense of belonging. Are they engaging their audiences? And are they, of course, differentiating themselves from the main competitors?
So, I mean, we've talked, and I've said I've got the report here in front of me. It is a real treasure trove of information. And so, Hannah, as you referenced, there's some articles in there. There's the ranking. There's the different pillars. And then there's the different elements when we talk about a sonic strategy. Could you highlight just some of the notable findings for you, right? As we said, this is the 5th year. It must always be exciting to kind of see any new trends or breakout brands. What for you are the kind of key things that we should know about?
Well, one of the most noticeable findings really was just the impact that a proper holistic sonic identity can really have. And the brands with the strong, consistent sonic identity are just much better equipped to set themselves apart from the competition. And we also found that some of the top performing brands in sectors like apparel and alcohol are really focusing more on a specific style of music, and they were choosing to invest more in licensed music, Although we should point out that it's simply relying on the licensed music without the holistic strategy is quite likely to dilute a brand's impact overall.
And that comes through in the report. So from what you're saying, so for me, I'm taking out that a well-crafted sonic strategy can play a really significant role in a brand's performance, right? Can drive relevance, build difference, and help set a brand apart. That's really obvious throughout the report. You just mentioned the use of licensed music. And I think for many of us who might not be as familiar with a sonic strategy and sonic identity, that's a really obvious use of music, right? You license a song that's already out there. Could you tell us a little bit more about the role it can play in actually enhancing a brand's sonic identity?
Well, licensed music can be a really powerful tool when it's used effectively. And one of the articles in this report was a case study looking at Dolce & Gabbana and Modelo, who both used the same track, The Ecstasy of Gold, which is a theme song from a film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And they had different results based on their approach. So really, it's just essential for brands to be really careful when they select when and how and what licensed music they're actually using, and really to make sure that it's aligning with the overall sonic strategy and that it's enhancing their messaging.
And if I can just add to that, in terms of the Modelo versus Dolce & Gabbana, the track really captures the essence of the Modelo brand. It's from the good, the bad, and the ugly. While in the case of Dolce & Gabbana, it didn't really fit with the brand it clashed. And you could also just see the engagement, even though Dolce & Gabbana is a much more international brand, it had lower engagement.
I mean, I think that's a fascinating case study. Actually, when I read it, it really brought it to life for me. And what it, from my perspective, was really clear on is that there are some do's and there are some don'ts when it comes to licensed music. So I'd be keen to hear, what can we learn from brands that do it well? You've just touched on a little bit there, but can you give us a little bit more information?
I think so. Even though we are a sonic branding agency focusing on creating holistic sonic identities, we are not saying that brands shouldn't license music, but they should consider why are they licensing music. We are firm believers that you should only license music when it is an integral part of the storytelling. So is the track itself a key part of the campaign? Because if it's not, then you might get into problems in the few months, a year, when the license is over. Then you have to take down the campaign from YouTube. And of course, in certain extent, that makes sometimes sense if it is part of the storytelling. But if it is a campaign that is meant to live a long, good life, then you might consider investing in your own copyright. So you don't need to take anything down. Because imagine all the amount of hard work and the money that is spent on a fancy campaign with a fancy licensed track, and then you have to take it down after a few months. That's just sad.
Well, yes, and I think you touched on it there as well with the investment that is needed when using licensed music. But as you say, it can work and it can be a game changer for particular brands. But I guess what I'm hearing from you is that it should be part of a bigger sonic strategy to be used effectively. Now, you touched on something that I think is quite interesting then, is that there is the opportunity then for brands to use more original music, right? And that's something the report talks about, is sonic originality. How does that work with a brand, and how might it contribute to helping a brand differentiate itself? To your earlier point, Bjorn, if you're using a licensed track, another brand might be using it. Does that help with brand differentiation, or who owns that? So how does sonic originality sort of come into play here? Oh, Bjorn, you're on mute.
I was just telling you what wonderful, good question this was.
Excellent.
So sonic originality plays a vital role in setting a brand apart from its competitors. In today's landscape where we have so many touch points, brands are on so many different social media channels, they're on TV. Brands that create a unique and original audio asset that can align with the brand values and personality can really stand out in the market, capturing attention and leaving impressions. And then, of course, if you have a holistic sonic identity that is also flexible, then you can share it with artists. They can adapt to it, with TikTok, with all the trends that are happening. You can see how it can take a life on its own and really then further engage with the target audience.
And do you have any particular examples of brands who do this well, who kind of lean into sonic originality in terms of how they set the brands apart?
Well, of course, Mastercard is number one, and it's for a reason. They have a sonic identity that is very flexible, and what they have done is that they have worked with artists such as Domino Saints, where they created a track that was then used for Copa 23 Femenina. And the track itself managed to reach number one in 9 Latin markets. And when you think about that, this is a brand working with the artist, and then all this free exposure to the brand melody is, you can't even put a monetary value on it. It's so impactful because the listeners are slowly learning the Mastercard melody as well as associating it with, hip and cool artists. And that's just, very good strategy.
Yeah, and Hannah, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this idea of sonic flexibility. Again, it's something that's mentioned in the report. Bjorn's talked about the Mastercard example. How do brands really effectively adapt their sonic strategies across those different platforms? So Bjorn's just talked about the World Cup and Mastercard. Yeah, are there different platforms, environments? How might that work for a brand?
Yeah, well, brands really need to just be adaptable and flexible. There are so many platforms now. So they need to be flexible in their sonic strategy to make sure that they're creating a consistent experience across all of these different platforms and these different environments. So, for example, when we're looking at a brand, we're evaluating how well they adapt these assets to their different touch points. So it might include digital platforms or physical spaces. And we're also considering different cultural contexts as well and things like that.
And why is that important, right? So, say I don't know much about sonic strategies or sonic flexibility. Why is it important that they can adapt across these different touch points?
Well, to make sure that you're memorable. And if you, for example, have only a sonic logo, then you will see it at the end of an ad usually. In today's landscape, when you have YouTube ads where you can click skip ad after 5 seconds, who will see your sonic logo? Or, you might watch the commercial and then by the time you kind of got the gist of it, then you click skip. But if you have a sonic identity that is a holistic thing and the sonic logo is only one part of it, then it can live on way more platforms, as well as, of course, touchpoints, where that is in the app or so on.
Okay. And kind of moving on from that idea of the different touch points, the report discusses the concept of a sonic ecosystem. Can you explain what that means and how brands might build an impactful audio ecosystem?
Of course. Yeah, so what we mean by sonic ecosystem, it is basically, it involves integrating sound and music across all brand touchpoints where it is needed, because of course you don't want to put sound just wherever. You need to think about it carefully. Create a seamless and immersive experience for consumers. Brands that strategically design their audio ecosystem can enhance brand recognition and engagement, and of course the emotional connection, because we know that music is the most powerful tool to touch us emotionally. And if brands can tap into that, it can be a really powerful tool.
And if I can add to that as well, if they want to be integrating sonic on all of these touch points, it is actually really important to have a tool that's going to be able to facilitate this process, whether it's 15-second clip for Instagram or a full larger campaign. And we recently launched our Sonic Hub, which is a new suite of tools, and it can help with exactly this. So, for example, the Sonic Space is a customizable cloud-based repository of all of a brand's sonic assets, and which we created to support marketing teams and agencies and really help them to make the best choices. And we also have Creation Station, which is attached to the Sonic Space. And this one is designed for brands to create branded audio assets for any content at all, and using the help of AI. So with tools like Sonic Space, marketers, social medias, managers, and so on, they don't have to rely on having a specialist to cut the music for them, because the system basically does it all pretty much automatically.
I mean, that sounds like a real gift, right? And I might come back, Hannah, and just ask you a little bit more about Sonic Hub, because I think it is a really, really interesting suite of tools. So if we can hold that one, and I will come back on that if we've got time towards the end. But Bjorn, I wanted to go back to something you just said a couple of minutes ago about the Sonic logo, which the report also mentions as being incredibly important. You talked about its placement sometimes can be a bit of a challenge, but the report also talks about it not being enough on its own. Can you just tell me a little bit more about its role in brand communication, and what do we mean by it's not enough on its own in terms of delivering a strong Sonic strategy?
Yeah, when we think about the history of branding and then look at it in terms of audio, you could say that the church bell is maybe the first Sonic logo.
I like that.
You know, people heard the church bell and they were like, okay, time to go to church.
Yeah.
Or then telling us what the time is. And it obviously served a good purpose. And then as marketing embraced Sonic branding, the Sonic logo was the go-to. You know, we just need a Sonic logo, nothing else, because we're going to put it at the back of our ads. But what we're seeing is that if you have an ad and only stick it at the end, where people are also now using streaming platforms, you know, they're not watching streamlined TV that much. Having only a Sonic logo becomes basically just not very effective, because we have all these other touch points that brands are communicating on. And if you have a branded melodies that can slowly but surely be attached to your brand, that is more flexible way, and you can also make sure that you are building equity through the long run, because there will be new touch points, there will be new ways of interacting with brands, and we know that even though the metaverse is a hype, you know, if a brand would have a presence in the metaverse, you don't want to just be blasting them the Sonic logo constantly. Like, you would have to, if you would walk into some metaverse store or even just a physical store, you know, if you have branded music within there that is a soundscape that is attractive, that makes people feel welcome, that is more effective than just having one single Sonic logo blasting constantly and just annoying people.
Hannah, is there anything you want to add on Sonic logos and their role? Yeah,
I mean, really, they're just Sonic representations of a brand, like in a very short space of time. So they're more like a mnemonic device, really, as Bjorn was saying.
Yeah, and I think that's probably how most of us see them. Now, in the report, one brand that actually I think had some really good use of a Sonic logo and alongside other Sonic assets was Aviva. So one of the things I noted when I looked through the actual ranking was obviously Aviva is there. I think it's number 3. It's moved up significantly in the last 12 months. It was number 63, is that right? In 2022. What are they doing right that's helped them shoot up your ranking in the last 12 months?
Hannah, you want to take this?
I'd love to hear from both of you. You can both tell me your thoughts on this one.
I was very impressed with Aviva when we were writing this, so I think.
You start then, yeah.
Well, they're doing a lot right, really, is the answer. They use the logo a lot. So I think they had about 88% usage
Yes,
of their logo.
that's
But
right.
they insure 80% of their own music, and they've done this within, just over a year, really. And the own music that they've created is everything from corporate to jazz. So they kind of have something for everything, really. So you can be one mood and then completely the next mood, completely branded within a matter of seconds. So they've really done an amazing job, which is why they're number 2.
And if I can add to that, what was a music to our ears is to see how quickly everyone embraced it, all the stakeholders of Aviva, because often we can see that it can take time to get every agency's marketing department to embrace the new sonic identity, because often there is a certain thought that this is going to be limiting, it's going to not fit to the creative commercial that they're doing. But in Aviva's case, they really managed to get really well every stakeholder onboarded. So everyone knew that this was the way to go, they're going to use it. And when it comes to sonic branding, it is a marathon, not a sprint, because it takes time for us to build those connections between the brand and the melodies. And of course, you can do a fast track by having the branded name within the sonic logo. But then if you're a, international brand, then you might also run into problems of how people pronounce the brand. I always think of Nike, like in Icelandic, it's Nike. And that wouldn't really work in Iceland as a sonic logo, but, just do it.
So that's a bit easier, right? And you mentioned actually the time it sometimes takes for either sonic logos or sonic identities to really bed in within an organization. And now I'm sure there's no hard and fast answer of, it takes this length of time or that length of time. I think, as you said, a lot depends on the stakeholders and how much the business gets behind it. But how quickly do you think you can affect change? I mean, you look at Aviva, it's shot up that list in 12 months. So a change in strategy or a focus strategy can actually, I would surmise from the report, have some results in a reasonably short time frame.
Yes, but I think it is important to especially get the leadership to buy into this, because then they are kind of giving orders, this needs to be done. And I recently got a message from an acquaintance of mine where he was asking if we had done the sonic identity. He's a filmmaker and he was doing a campaign for this brand which had recently created sonic identity. And then he was asking if he could get the sonic identity material for the video that he was cutting. And then the marketing department said, oh no, don't worry, just use some stock. And of course, that beats the purpose of creating a sonic identity, because you need to have someone with authority basically saying, you need to do this. Like, no shortcuts, no stock music is allowed.
There's an element of consistency there. And so
exactly.
In the same way that we might talk about brand guardianship for a visual identity, then I'm guessing that having guardianship for a sonic identity is equally important.
Yeah, and I think it is partially due to just lack of education about the impact sonic branding can have on consumers. And, no marketing department would be like, just go into Microsoft Paint and, create a new version of our logo and stick it on there. Like, the marketing department knows the impact of the visual logo, but there's a little bit lack of understanding of the impact of music and also sonic logos and so on.
One other highlight within the report was an emerging trend around voice branding. And I know when we chatted earlier in the week, I said to you, what is voice branding? What does this mean? And I guess with an increase in things like audio first platforms, podcasts, music streaming, voice assistants, what do we mean by voice branding? Hannah, I'll start with you. And then how do brands effectively utilize voice to maybe enhance their music strategies overall?
Well, voice branding is about selecting and developing a really distinctive voice for a brand that, again, aligns with the personality and the values. And brands can use a voice to create really good consistency across all of the audio touch points. So it can be in their ads, can be their voice assistant, any audio content, call centers, anything. And this further enhances their recognition. And again, back to the emotional connections, it really helps with that.
And if you can think of voice branding also in terms of like what is done on TV, when TV shows are being dubbed. Marge Simpson, for example, she has a very specific voice.
She does, yeah.
But if you listen to her in whether that is Icelandic, Spanish, French, Portuguese, it's all the same type of squeaky, kind of raspy voice. And brands can decide to do that if it is kind of a part of their brand personality to have a specific type of voice. And now also with the rapid movement of the AI and voice cloning, brands can even start cloning voices and having them speak in different languages for different use cases. So there's a lot of possibilities for voice branding.
And do you think if we were sat here in 12 months' time talking about the best audio brands in 2024, do you think that is a trend we're going to see more brands lean into over the next 12 months? Are there any particular categories you think that voice branding might be really important for?
Anna, you want to take this?
You go for it.
Okay. So it's hard to say because there have been many instances of very good voice branding where we associate usually then some famous people to a certain brand. And when we think about O2, you know, I think of Sean Bean and I go back to my childhood memories and I'm like, that was a good TV show I watched. But now with these new capabilities and what that offers to brands, maybe they will move away from having expensive spokespersons and rather think about if they have a good voice that fits with their brand, and then they can use that also on other touch points. So when we think about, you know, TikTok, loads of brands are using this AI voice that is very well known on TikTok, but then there's no brand differentiation. If you have your voice branded and you have it cloned, so you can just type in text and get a really authentic speaking from the clone, then of course that can be used on TikTok. So you don't need to rely on the TikTok AI voice and so on. And I think, and I hope and think that some brands will realize the potential of this.
Well, it's exciting to see what happens over the next 12 months. And I think from what you're saying, it is about having that ownable and distinctive voice that will help set brands apart. Hannah, you very briefly mentioned the Sonic Hub tool earlier on, and I said I'm going to come back to that. And now, obviously, that has allowed you and the team to really dig deeper into brand Sonic strategies and their performance. What can it bring to the daily life of marketing professionals or people that work within audio or Sonic? How can it help all of us in our daily lives?
I think there are many ways that it can help. One of them, obviously, we've mentioned earlier, is for brands to have everything in one place and create things very quickly. But outside of that, you know, there's a whole host of just information on different industries, comparing a brand to its own sector to other sectors in terms of how it sounds, its moods, how can it stand out based on that. So really there's so many different ways. I don't know which one you want to go into.
And maybe if I can add to that, for example, within our Sonic Radar tool, you can compare yourself to your main competitor, as Hannah said, and the industry, but you can even see how much you're roughly spending more than your competitors. So that can give brands an idea of like, okay, we are spending more overall because we're a bigger brand, but per video we are either spending more or less on music, and that is, I think, a very good tool for brands to have, just to start making them think about where they are and how they are spending on music, because we all know that sometimes in, for example, working on a campaign, the music becomes the afterthought. It's cut to some demo track, and then they're gonna license it, and then they realize, oh no, we don't have the budget for the licensing, and then they're like scrambling at the very last end to really find music that fits. And when you take all these things to consider, like how they're spending music, money on music, you really start thinking more strategically about how you're spending. And that's something that has proven valuable to our clients.
I can imagine it might be a bit of an eye-opener to some organizations to actually have that capability from somebody completely objective to pull together how much they might be spending. There could be a few surprises. I would imagine that people might not even know within their own organization if local markets are off licensing music or spending money. So I guess there's one great benefit straight up.
And then sorry.
No, I was just going to say, to be able to compare themselves to the competitive set is really interesting as well.
So what we actually do to make for the brands to be able to better compare is also we scrape the social media channels, all the videos are downloaded, and then we have it analyzed with our AI tool in terms of mood and genre. And this can also be often very eye-opening to brands, because they're like, oh, so we are now using very calm, relaxing music, though usually in our campaigns we are trying to be energetic. That's usually because some social media manager or someone is just quickly doing videos for social media, and then all brand guidelines go out the window because they need to do it so quickly. And that's why also then the creation station comes in, where you can have branded tracks and really quickly have it adapt to the video that you're creating.
And a lot of these tools I could go on and use them myself, right? They don't require a huge amount of training or understanding of how they work. They're all self-serve and
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So like within our creation station, you just upload a video, click on the mood, the genre, and then it spits out a couple of examples for you. You can watch it with the video and click on the one that you like. You can even then go into kind of the stems and say, like, I don't like the drums, I don't want any drums, and then you can take that out, but it's all just click a button. There's no, technology that you need to interact with apart from, the mouse button click.
You can also go and have a look at the research section in the report, which we actually did some interesting research using the creation station, which is...
Yeah, maybe Hannah, if you want to add a little bit on that, because those are some fascinating insights.
We can do. We did this a little while ago, and we basically did 3 separate studies, but we sort of put them all together in one in the report. But we did a series of videos that we'd taken from social media, so real videos, and we looked at the difference between using stock music and then using our AI enhanced music with branded sounds in it. And we compared them, and it was really remarkable. We just found huge differences in likability, vividness, memorability for these exact same very short Instagram videos or YouTube videos. But the results were really quite amazing.
And it's clear also why this is happening, because, within stock music, you cannot really have any melodies. You can't have anything that is memorable, because then it's usually copyrighted, or you can get into problems with, the copyright. And stock music is often quite mundane and kind of just blends in the background.
Well, they call it lift music, don't they?
Exactly. And what our creation station is capable of doing is that it takes the brand melodies and weaves it into any type of music. So you're always creating, first of all, brand equity and memorability of your brand and the music, but also it is just more engaging because it is music that is not lift music. It has melodies, it has riffs, it's engaging, and the results really showed that.
I am going to ask you both one more question, and then we will take some questions from the audience. But I'll give you just 2 seconds to have a think. If you were to tell me kind of what was the most surprising or moment that you were pulling together a report and you got a little bit excited, because I know what it's like sometimes when you're looking at data or you're looking at results or rankings and you think, oh my goodness, that's really interesting. And you want to almost go and just tell the person in the next room if you're working from home. If there was something in the report that kind of made you go, oh goodness, I wasn't expecting that, or I'm really surprised, or that's really interesting, exciting, what would be your one takeout? And I'm totally putting you on the spot here, because we did not talk about asking this question. Bjorn, I'm going to start with you. What for you was that aha or oh wow moment?
Well, it was aha mixed with happiness, but also sadness. And that was seeing quite a few brands using fantastically the Sonic logo, in their 85 to 100% usage of Sonic logos, but then they used almost exclusively stock music. And you're like, oh my God, you got it right. No, you didn't, almost. And that was kind of, they have thought about Sonic branding, but they just didn't take it far enough, or thought about the longevity of only having one Sonic asset that they can rely on. And that was both happiness and sadness when I noticed that.
Sadness. I like that, but I guess an opportunity, right?
Absolutely.
Because they are using Sonic in one aspect incredibly well, but it is that more holistic strategy that actually is what the report talks about, right? And that's what the pillars talk about, is the strategy as a whole, rather than just one element of it or one asset. So an opportunity. So let's take it as a good aha moment.
Absolutely. They've taken the first step.
Yes.
Now they just need to do the next one.
I know, right? Well, then the good news is there's help. Okay. Hannah, what was your moment?
So many moments. But I was happy to see there were quite a lot of new identities that we found this year, which was lovely. And also that last year we only had one brand that had 100% Sonic logo usage, and we had 4 this year in the top 10.
Yes.
As well, which was really, yeah. But I was also sad about as Bjorn was saying, there were definitely some brands that had their very old sad look, like Green Giant was one right at the end. And you almost would have missed it. So it was sad to see some not being used properly.
Being used. Baby steps, right?
Yeah, the Green Giant is not saying ho 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 so much these days. Ho ho ho.
You have to
okay.
wait a sort of 3 minutes of stock music before you even get to that, maybe.
You got to it. I mean, look, I could ask you hundreds more questions, but I'm going to open it up so that others can ask. Before we do that, well, some of you might be thinking about the questions that you want to ask. We are going to play a really short video showing you the top 10 brands within the report. So while we play this, you can type your questions or start to think about them, and then I will put these questions to Hannah and Bjorn straight afterwards.
Get in the zone. AutoZone.
Very memorable Sonic logo there right at the end that we all know nowadays. We've got some really good questions in, so I will do my best to read them and hopefully explain them. If not, then please do clarify. So I think this is a really good one and an interesting one, right? Do we have stats on who's really benefiting from the shared equity play with artists? So Coca-Cola was also a brand that back in the day had amazing executions that built on their 5-note mnemonic, but it still struggled with unaided recall when consumers heard the Sonic logo. Do you guys have a view on who kind of benefits most? Sometimes when brands associate or link themselves to specific artists or pieces of music. Oh, Bjorn, I think you're on mute.
If I understand Steve's questions correctly, he's referring here to the Mastercard and the Domino Saints that I mentioned. And of course, Mastercard is also very, they have made sure to work with also up and coming artists. And in the terms of Domino Saints, of course, it was very much benefiting Domino Saints because they managed to get this top 1 spot in 9 Latin countries. And of course, the royalties of that track are going to the artists. In terms of then the brand recognition, that takes time. And we have done a small little survey in Latin America, where we looked at if, when we played the excerpt from the Domino Saints track, if it was recognized, and then also associated with Mastercard, and we found that a significant portion was able to do the connection.
Okay. Steve, hopefully that answers or gives you some thoughts. If not, then pop another note in the chat and we can dig a little deeper. Next up, we have a question from Cohen. Working for Reed Speaker, they do text to speech, which I think is really interesting, the concept of voice branding. So they focus on using branded voice. It's really complementary to Sonic branding, as we've talked about. How do you guys think the combination will work in conversational environments, so including, for example, the metaverse?
I think it's going to be absolutely crucial for brands to have a branded owned voice, especially for, the metaverse, because then you will know that you're interacting with the brand. Because with technology, metaverse, and we saw with Twitter when the blue tag was, you could buy it, all kinds of brands were, making fun of, where some comedian would, make a tweet from a fake account. But if you have a branded voice, then when you are in a conversational environment, then this will of course be harder and crucial to also build that trust.
Okay. Hannah, did you have anything to add to that one?
Well, I mean, I think trust is a huge thing, isn't
Yeah.
it? And that's a big point. And we talked already about O2 and the sound of that, the familiarity of a branded voice there. And yeah, I think in the more distant space, that's going to become far more important when you're not in reality. Sure.
Yes. Okay. And then this one, I think is more of a comment, but actually I think it's really interesting just to perhaps reiterate some of the messaging that you guys sort of talked about earlier. Interested to see someone trying to explain the basics of the brand Sonic logo space, which I did quiz you on quite hard to make sure I had understood it as well. Something that Arnon has been talking about for a long time, still misunderstood. I think that's a fair point. And he's looking forward to seeing the report, which obviously is on the website. And I think you can download now. But is there anything else you guys want to add in terms of that misunderstanding around the Sonic logo space that is important, that you think that people either working in the space or within marketing really need to know in terms of what we mean by Sonic logo and how it fits within a broader ecosystem?
Yeah, maybe one thing to note where people are thinking, oh, Sonic logo, it shouldn't be put at the end of a commercial because it will clash with the music before. But if you have a flexible Sonic logo that is melodic and not just sound effects, for example, then you can adapt the Sonic logo to seamlessly go from the music into the Sonic logo. And that's something that I think a lot of brands should consider, especially if it's a big campaign with, maybe even a licensed song. Then you can have a seamless transition from the licensed song to the Sonic logo.
And also maybe the idea at the beginning more often as well. Sometimes I'm seeing a lot more of that these days, which is really nice.
Well, I think also that's valuable, isn't it, in a sort of world where we're always slightly short of attention, and waiting until the very end, I think sometimes can be a disadvantage. Danny has a good question. So I was sort of scanning through and reading this one, and I think this is good. I like the terminology here, the fatal blind spot. What do you think is the most fatal blind spot brands have when it comes to putting budget into sound? So, we all know marketing budgets are a constant battle and a challenge. What do you guys think is the biggest challenge here, or things that people simply don't think about?
Well, it's our experience that, first of all, often sound is an afterthought. Sometimes brands are going through a huge, brand repositioning or brand lift, and then at the end of the thing they're like, oh, maybe we should have sound. So we were brought in at the very last minute, and we're like, we can work with this, but it would have been much better for everyone involved if it had been included from the very beginning. But that's something that is easily fixed if you're just thinking of the importance of sound, especially nowadays where we're going even screenless with smart speakers and so on. And in terms of another blind spot is, not every CMO has the or stakeholders, they don't have the patience to see Sonic identity really blossom, because they invest in something and they're like, well, no one knows it. And they're like, yeah, but you've only done one campaign on TV and then you don't use it on social media. People have problems with it being, a long-term investment. And if you also have branded music that you own the copyright on, then slowly you can start seeing return on investment, because you can start using those tracks for different videos on social media. You get maybe a campaign that used a fancy track that you created 2 years ago, then it can be repurposed on social media for another campaign or whatnot. And so there's also the cost effectiveness, but in the long term, because of course there's a budget that needs to take into account from the very beginning, but it's a considerable investment, but it will hopefully, if people do it correctly, pay back in the long term.
And you talked about this earlier, actually having the buy-in from leadership and across the organization, which I guess will help bake that Sonic into the strategy, the brand strategy earlier, as you pointed out, that's really important, but also help with that longevity piece of people having a little bit of patience, which is, as they say, a virtue, to be able to see things through. Let's jump. There's questions coming in thick and fast now. This always happens when you get towards the end of time. Paul has a question. Great to see how Sonic plays out in marketing. How important do you think it is in physical brand experience? This is a good question. I like this one. Not that I didn't like the others, but this one I think is really good. Yeah, pop-ups, for example. Hannah, should we start with you? What are your thoughts on how it plays out physically?
I think it's really important. I mean, a lot of people are spending a lot of time thinking about the smell of their shop or, and the inviting scent, but the sound is so important. And there's a lot of research that shows that people spend more time in environments that sound more fitting to a brand. People spend more, people return quicker and more frequently to places. So yeah, I think the way that sound is in a physical space is incredibly important. Yeah.
And you guys have just released a report. I'm going to give your Amplify magazine a quick plug here as well, which I was reading last week, on the sound of airlines, and actually the physical space on an airline or in an airline lounge, even in an airport, has a huge impact, right? If you think about your mood and your emotional state as you go on holiday and things like that, or you're traveling. So yeah, it can play a huge role, I would think.
It's another great example of that. And talking of amplifiers, how do you feel walking into that space, especially if you're somebody who maybe is stressed about flying? So yeah, the space.
That's me, Hannah, a nervous flyer. A little bit of music can go a long way, right? Calm you down. Or the voice branding, right? All this, everything that you guys have talked about today. So very important, I think, is what we're saying here. When it comes to physical brand experiences. And would you say underplayed, Bjorn? Do you think there's an opportunity to do more, do better?
Obviously, a lot of brands are using music effectively in their brand spaces. But what there's an opportunity in is, for example, if you're in, let's take H&M, for example, just hypothetical here. They have a lot of pop music, popular music that has now reached the charts. But imagine if H&M had a sonic identity where they could have artists reinterpreted their DNA and then place those tracks within the playlist that is also using the top of the charts music. Then you are creating brand equity, you're creating memorability for your sonic identity, and then including it in your physical space. And that's something that I have not seen within any of the clothing stores that I go into, but there's definitely an opportunity there, which could be really interesting.
Let's try and squeeze in a couple more questions. Freddie wants to know, how do you quantify the value of sonic branding?
In terms of how we measure like return on investment, is that
I would take the question. That's how I would interpret this question.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what we do is we have basically a hypothetical brand, and within our huge Excel this brand uses the Sonic logo 100%, have only owned music, and then we take the average value of the music spent of all the brands within the 250 brands, and then see how they stack up in terms of efficiency to this hypothetical best brand as well as a hypothetical worst brand. So that's basically when we look at if you are reading the report and you will see efficiency score, which is in percentages, you're basically seeing how close they are to the perfect brand.
Okay. I think we're pretty much out of time. If you do have other questions, then you can see the marvelous little ticker tape going along the bottom. There's Bjorn's contact details there. Please feel free to reach out and ask. I can see lots of great comments in the chat as well. Thank you for being very enthusiastic. Thank you for the discussion that is going on alongside our session today. And thank you for all the questions that you asked. We explored a number of key things today. In fact, we explored quite a lot, so it's hard to do a bit of a sum up or a summary. But we started with the impact of music on marketing. We talked about how different brands were leveraging Sonic strategies to connect with their audiences. And we talked about different pillars within AMP's Best Audio Brands report. I'd like to say a massive thank you to Bjorn and Hannah for their time today and for sharing their expertise. I learned an enormous amount in the run up to today's session, but also during today's session. Thank you for letting me spring a few surprise questions in there as well to keep you on your toes. And thank you all for joining us. So that wraps up our session today. Thank you for watching. To learn more, as we said, do feel free to contact Bjorn, and also to keep up to date with other events, other content. I mentioned Amplify. There are editions of Amplify out there covering different categories and different topics, so go have a rummage. And yeah, click on the video, like, subscribe if you want to stay in touch and hear more from us in the future. But stay tuned, and thanks again for your attention and for joining us all today.
Thank you.